When it comes to super high yielding dividend ETFs, we've all heard of names like JPIE or even JPIE that yield anywhere from around 8, 9, 10+% on a yearly basis. But one thing I don't really hear that many people talking about, what are the highest yielding ETFs across the entire stock markets? Now in this video, we're going to go through all of the highest yielding dividend ETFs across the entire stock markets. And I'm going to personally share with you some of my favorite highest yielding ETFs that are yielding north of 15, 20, and even 45+%. Now, if you happen to be interested in higher yielding instruments, make sure to stick around because you are not going to want to miss a thing. I just finished my brand new dividend investing ebook where I share exactly how I went from zero to now over 7 figures invested, and also on how I earned more than $6,000 per month in dividends. I also finished my custom dividend tracker that you can use to track your dividend income progress on an ongoing basis. So make sure to grab yourself a copy of my dividend investing ebook and the new dividend tracker today. It's the first link in my description. So first things first, looking through the top 100 highest yielding dividend ETFs as of right now, and keep in mind this is just one list I came across. There's probably many other lists across the internet. But just to give you an idea, some of the highest yielding ETFs, at least on this list, are things like ticker symbol CYA, or the Simplified Tail Risk Strategy ETF, that has a dividend yield of 113%. Then we have things like TSLY, which I'm sure you guys are more familiar with, that's yielding somewhere around 73%. Then we have things like KBA, yielding 57.35%. Now, before we go into some of my hand-picked favorite highest yielding ETFs that I actually personally own in my portfolios, I want to give an obvious word of caution. Just because an ETF makes this list, and just because this ETF says that it's yielding 100%, 70%, or 57%, for example, 100% should not be a reason, or at least the only reason, on investing into something like this. For the obvious reason that just because an asset has a high yield does not make it a good investment. And on top of that, before filming this video, I did some research on a few of these different names that I haven't heard of, and a lot of these names have very inconsistent dividend payouts, and even if they are perhaps offering a super high substantial dividend yield, it might be because of something like a special dividend or something of the sorts. But one of the super high yielding ETFs that did make the top list that is actually in my portfolio as of right now is ticker symbol SVOL, or the Simplified Volatility Premium ETF. Now, for those of you that aren't aware of this ETF, right here on Simplified's website it says the Simplified Volatility Premium ETF, or SVOL, seeks to provide investment results before fees and expenses that correspond to approximately 1/5 to 3/10 the inverse performance of the VIX index. Now, SVOL is definitely what I would consider sort of an alternative investment, and for me personally, it would never make up the majority of my portfolio, but I do think that we have to give credit where it's due, and SVOL, the Simplified Volatility Premium ETF, has had quite a year, up 5.12% year to date, and that's not even including the massive dividend that I'm going to show you here in a second. But just to be transparent, on the max time frame, SVOL, along with many of the other super high yielding ETFs like this, is down 10%. But even though it's in the red, the dividends have definitely made up for that loss. So SVOL currently has somewhere of around a trailing 12-month dividend yield of around 16 or 17%, which is honestly super high. You're not going to find this high of a dividend yield all that frequently throughout the markets. And by shorting the volatility index, SVOL has been able to pay a pretty substantial dividend every single month since I got into the ETF, and even before then. And to be more specific, the last few dividends that were paid when it comes to SVOL, we have a dividend that was paid just as of recently. Last month, SVOL paid 30 cents per share, 30 cents before then, 30 cents before then, and then pretty much 32 cents on a monthly basis all the way back to around a year ago. Now, although SVOL is definitely not at the top of this list on the top 100 highest yielding dividend ETFs, after filtering through the majority of these names, SVOL definitely does offer a super high yield, or at least it has so far historically. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen in the future for this ETF, or honestly anything for that matter, but so far so good. SVOL has pretty much maintained exactly where it's been trading at and been paying out a monster dividend along the way, which I've definitely been pretty content with. The next super ultra high yielding ETF that's paying more than most other stocks or ETFs across the market, but also I would consider it on the safer side. And again, take that with a grain of salt. I'm saying quote unquote safer side compared to many of the other ETFs in this list. What I'm talking about is ticker symbol CLM, or the Cornerstone Strategic Value Fund. Now, even though CLM has decayed a lot over time, this ETF is down 92% as far as the all-time chart. Year to date, this ETF is only down around 4.6%, and the dividends that it pays have definitely made up for it. CLM has a dividend yield forward of around 20%, and CLM all throughout the last year has paid out around 12 cents on a monthly basis, and then just as of recently 11 cents. And if we look all the way back from 5 years ago, CLM has paid a pretty consistent dividend over the last 5 years. And although the ETF did pay more a few years ago, the ETF is also way cheaper to buy into, and the yield has remained pretty steady. Now, as far as total return goes, as far as ETF return or lack thereof, plus dividends included, stay tuned towards the end of this video because we're going to go through the total return for all of these. Now, the last ETF on this list that I would consider at least worthy of joining my portfolio, and keep in mind there are others also, but just out of the top 3 is TSLY, or the YieldMax Tesla Option Income Strategy ETF. Now, TSLY has definitely been on a lot of dividend investors' radar since the beginning of this year. I can attest to that. And maybe it's because of the fact that it's yielding around 60 or 70% as of filming this video. Now, a little bit about this ETF, it says the fund does not invest directly into Tesla. So even though TSLY uses Tesla as a reference stock, it doesn't invest into Tesla specifically. And I've talked about this on previous videos, so definitely check those out. But the way that YieldMax does this is they use something called a synthetic cover call strategy. And by using options, basically creates a synthetic cover call, which is in some ways similar to a regular cover call, which I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with or at least have heard about. Now, TSLY has definitely had sort of a rough year, down around 14.9% year to date, making the max time frame down almost 50%, and this ETF has only been around for around a year. So ETF price or NAV decay is definitely going to be a suspect when it comes to TSLY, but again, that's sort of to be expected when it comes with these sort of assets. Now, TSLY definitely makes a list for one of the highest yielding dividend ETFs across the entire market, with a trailing 12-month dividend yield around 74%. And although I admit it, I bought into some TSLY earlier this year because I was sort of interested and I wanted to get in on it. And of course, partially because this ETF was paying upwards of 90 cents all the way to $1.07 on a monthly basis for an ETF that costs around $20 at the time of it paying that. But as of recently, I've actually been averaging down on my shares of TSLY and getting paid a monthly dividend that I'm pretty happy with. Now, lastly, I promised that I would stack up TSLY next to SVOL and CLM and show you the total return of all these ETFs over multiple different time frames. Now, keep in mind, some of these ETFs have not been around all that long, so we're not going to have all that much data to go off of. But if we were to take price return or lack thereof plus dividends included, year to date at least, CLM is up 13%, which definitely is not horrible. SVOL is up 21% almost, and TSLY is up 49% year to date. Now, keep in mind, a lot of investors sort of rag on investment types like these because they do have a lot of decay in their price. But as you can see right here, if you were to use the dividends in the equation and look at the total return, these ETFs have performed pretty well, better than many other stocks and ETFs across the markets. Now, if we were to stretch things out a little bit further on the last year time frame, we can see that TSLY is officially in the red, down 2.3%, where SVOL is still in the green, 23% return, and CLM is up 4.37%. So one thing to keep in mind and a word with caution when it comes to these super high yielding ETFs, have a plan going into it. Maybe it's that you reinvest a majority of the dividend back into the fund. Or maybe it's something different, whatever it is. When it comes to these sort of ETFs, I think having a plan and sort of a use case is definitely necessary because these ETFs, even though they pay massive yields, can definitely sort of be all over the place. But now I want to hear from you guys down below, out of CLM, SVOL, and TSLY. If you could only hold one of these super high yielding ETFs, which one would it be and why? Make sure to comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like down below and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.